how can I even rely on your what you're telling me to make a decision? To do that, sometimes you have to suspend your belief in order to see the other person, to truly see the other person, and trust that if this is what the person is sharing, is what has worked, is what has been passed down from generation, that this is how you deal with this. Trust that it will be okay, even when based on your own knowledge and your own way of thinking, your own way of making assumption and making inferences.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Co-Management Commons podcast. And this is another interesting one where I've tried a little bit of a different format. And I have a great guest. His name is Dr. Denis Ndeloh. He's the wildlife director with the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board. And he's been very generous a couple of times now with his time and has spoken with a class that I teach at Dalhousie, the community-based co-management course, and he's shared his experience in Nunavut, but also his international experience and the work that he's done in co-management and his research efforts in Cameroon with Cross River Gorilla. And it's a very interesting opportunity to be able to compare the way wildlife is managed in different countries in comparison to Canada, and to give all of us in Canada an appreciation for the fact that our systems and recognition right now of Indigenous knowledge systems and so on have really improved and are going in the right direction. So Denis has studied in Belgium, where he did a Master's of Science degree. He has his doctorate in 2013, where he focused on traditional ecological knowledge. And he's also someone that cares deeply and puts his ideas into action, and is the founder of the community-based Biosynergy Management. It's a Cameroonian nonprofit organization that's working to foster global person-centered biosynergy through Indigenous wildlife monitoring. So you'll find that he thinks very deeply, and this particular podcast I had to adapt a little bit with the audio, so my apologies if it seems a little broken at times, but I've gone back and have really kept Denis's stories intact as they were delivered, so you can really appreciate the learning that he offers through them. So I hope you enjoy, and take care.
Hello, everyone. It's a great privilege of mine to be here to share this evening with you and to talk to you, but also to learn from you and about my own life experiences and what I think about management. My name is Denis Ndeloh. I was born and raised in Cameroon. Cameroon is in Central Africa. I studied both in Cameroon, but also in Brussels, where I did a master's and a PhD so many years ago. I moved to Canada almost 10 years ago, where I have worked both in Ontario, but also extensively for the past 8 to 9 years in Nunavut, where I'm sitting today. Currently, and for the past 6 to 7 years, I have worked with the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board, initially as a wildlife biologist, but currently as the Director of Wildlife Management. And it is one of this, is a very common thing within land claims, modern land claims in Canada, that because Indigenous people depend on wildlife a lot. Boards, tribunals were created within the agreements to make sure that access to wildlife is not unduly prohibited or restricted. Only when it is absolutely necessary should Indigenous people be limited from accessing wildlife to the full extent, which in some land claims include the right to sell to meet their economic needs. And only them can define what the full extent of the economic or cultural needs are when it comes to utilizing wildlife. Unless and except they are justified restriction on the use of wildlife, which can only be put in place to serve, as in most most land claims, justifiable conservation, serve a valid. The Nunavut Agreement talks about valid conservation purpose. Now, how do you define what is valid? What is valid to me may not be very valid to you. And therefore, to make sure that this actually works, this agreements together, there's administrative tribunals, which are boards, where citizens, not judges, become judges, so to speak, and they listen to everybody, make their own arguments, and provide their own evidence. And at the end of the day, that together make a decision as to the reasonableness or the validness of measures that seek to restrict access to wildlife. So that is where I work. I also bring some international perspective into the work because I have been involved in wildlife conservation and to some extent wildlife management in Africa long before I ever moved to the north. And I am considered by virtue of my training, because I did a PhD in cross-river ecology, to be an expert in primate conservation in Africa. And I have seen also firsthand some of the difficulties in actually achieving anything, because in that system, and most that system regulations are made from the top up. So the president in Cameroon, for example, there's a presidential decree that says thou shalt never kill an elephant. I'm just making that up. There is no such a presidential decree, but there could be, or thou should never kill a gorilla, whatever. And then everybody has to obey that as just the same as you obey God or something. But does it really work? These governments have power, but they lack resources and they are very corrupt. So what that means is that the wildlife will just keep disappearing. Just people do it when you're not seen, because there is very little buy-in or even understanding of why they shouldn't. If they're hungry, why they shouldn't kill a monkey or a duck or whatever. So I have seen in that system the other way, how it's very difficult. And then that really make me appreciate co-management or appreciate a different perspective that, at least from the way it is intended, seeks to bring people together, to facilitate people coming together. And even though by working in a co-management system, I have appreciated the challenges and where we are in terms of co-management in Canada, I can already see that it is a step up from a system where one guy with a single degree selects which species we should harvest and to what level, and which one not to. So those perspectives humble me when I get frustrated with co-management, because I know what is on the other side, and it is important. But also just knowing how species coexist with humans, and knowing the similarities between traditional ecological knowledge, as we used to call it in Cameroon, and Inuit knowledge, right? Related to elephants or gorillas or chimpanzees, and Inuit knowledge about whales or porpoise or caribou. Those similarities in indigenous ways of knowing in a different system that has different foundations and different assumptions and different worldviews to the Western science methodology and Western science system of resource management is also perspective that I think I bring along, because I have seen it. I can, in a different part of the world, working with, even through my own non-profit work, looking at the way Baka indigenous people in the Congo Basin um, interact with wildlife, and also what the challenges they're facing. I could almost compare that word for word with how Inuit people have always depended on and lived with wildlife and what challenges they're facing. So those are the perspectives, if I want to say, that I think, to me, I value as I approach this work.
That part of Dennis's talk so far has been really interesting, and it is unique to be able to compare what happens in Canada and Nunavut specifically with what some of the other alternatives may be in other parts of the world. And like he says, it's a good idea for all of us to stay humble. And sometimes we get caught up thinking that things are not so great, but in many ways of thinking at things, are pretty good. So I followed up and asked Dennis about his research days in Cameroon and what his methods and what that looked like for him doing community based research at that stage of his career.
Thank you. Hmm, I will start with the traditional ecological. So because I first did a master's that was looking at ecological knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, and the conservation of cross-river gorillas was the story I was trying to tell. So some background: cross-river gorillas are one of the 4 subspecies of gorillas. They are confined to the mountainous range between Cameroon and Nigeria, around the headwaters of the Cross River, hence the Cross River gorillas. They're critically endangered. About 300 are left in the wild, fragmented in 18 patches of forest, that most of which are not actually connected anymore. So from that perspective, the death of one cross river gorilla is usually like one 300 of the species is dead. And so it's usually a big deal. So when I grew up, I will hear, my father was a hunter himself, so you would trap wildlife. You didn't actually hunt with gun, but you use snails, and you will catch anything that you could. And that he sells the meat, and that is how we managed to go to school. So, but when I was training conservation, I was always told that hunters are the problem. Hunters should be in jail. Hunters should be, whatever. Never be allowed to hunt for species to survive. But then I said, well, that was a theory. That was hunting is a problem. Hunting is the main threat to survival of wildlife. It is. The level of hunting dictates how species are going to, survive. But I always felt that is half a story. What about people like my father? Should they really never have hunted anything or trapped any wildlife? Then what would become of me then? Would I ever have gone to school? Is a question I will ask myself, and I will not have answers because I was passionate about preserving wildlife. I was, but at the same time, I had to start thinking outside the box. Then beyond that, when my father always came back from the forest, there were always the stories about wildlife that go beyond like I saw an animal and I tried to kill it or whatever. Some of the stories were related to the spirituality of some of these animals. That, oh yeah, I knew why I couldn't see them or couldn't hear them because they transformed to human beings and they will understand me, or all kinds of things that in the sense of a young person who is going to university and learning the Western education means just doesn't make sense. But yet they were very powerful because when they were told, especially, the circumstances, this is late in the night and the father is narrating the stories about animals or spirits, you cannot ignore it. It becomes part of you. It creates who you are. But I didn't understand it. So that is why when I embraced those in the human ecology class, this is where my master's was based. I said I wanted to investigate further religious traditional ecological knowledge and governance. I wanted to know more about that. So I started talking to people. Cameroon is very diverse, so you move 40 kilometers, the people speak completely different language that you don't understand. So the villages I was doing research in, I didn't understand the languages. So and those villages even in the same area had different. So anyway, so I always had people interpreting for me. But I could sense when somebody is speaking, when it means a lot to them, even though I could not understand, I could not empathize, I could not take in what they were saying because it is a different worldview almost compared to mine. I was Christian, so at the time. So I will speak to these women and we'll talk about gorillas and chimpanzees transforming into humans. They will talk about traditional medicine men using gorillas to harvest plants that they use to then cure humans. They'll talk about stories about women who will not eat any primate or any human-looking animal because they fear that their children will give birth to children looking like those species. There are all these things that, although unexplained, did shape the society, the human society where I live. And it was powerful to them. And so I decided, who am I to start telling them about the word endangered and critically endangered, a word they will not understand because the Western literacy levels in those places are near zero. Why can I not just talk about totems and kingship and all of these other practices that they will understand and that they're passionate about? And that was the basis of my master thesis. So I go around and talk to people, do an interview, and some of the question was, tell me a story. Do you know a story about this? Because I know that traditional ecological knowledge is usually passed down through stories and songs. It's not something is written. It's what your grandfather told you. It's what your great grandfather told you. It's what you heard from that herbalist when you went to collect your medication. It's people tell me all of these stories. They identify. People show me bones that they scrape and put in water and wash their children so that when their children grow up, they'll be strong as girls. I don't know why you need your son or your daughter to be strong as girls, but there you go. Those stories influenced me. After a while, I could no longer distinguish me just being an observer and a student from me being part of that cosmology. That could influence me. Once you start telling those stories, they influence me, and that was a transformation. Something was happening there. And so that was So those were the methods. It was just talking to people, asking them to tell me a story, asking them if they've ever seen a gorilla, and just writing that down. That is why when it came to trying to publish that, it was very difficult because, again, it is anything about traditional ecological knowledge doesn't fit the frame of the Western system of publishing papers or whatever. I argued, and I had to argue over and over again, that if someone's belief system makes them not hurt a gorilla, even if it is one, in a situation where we only have 300, I think that is a conservation gain. And it doesn't matter if you believe it. It doesn't matter if you believe it. It is working. You can see it work. So why do you want to take that away? Why do you want to find a way to explain it? Why do you want to find a way to justify it? That is to me what I took from those that work in those years. And I still believe that today, even when I'm dealing with Indigenous knowledge in a different continent.
I found that part of Dennis's talk really interesting and speaks to how we all need to reflect on our positionalities when we're involved in research projects. And certainly interesting to learn about the level of diversity as well in the area that he did his research, and the language barriers and how he navigated that, but also how he was able to really feel and get a sense from people who shared directly their traditional ecological knowledge. So I really enjoyed that. And in the next part of this talk, I asked Dennis specifically about being a founder of a nonprofit in Cameroon, and asked him to share a little bit about that and what motivated him, and the work that he does in that area. And I think you'll agree that it certainly takes a lot of initiative.
I have convinced myself that there are two, really key things that led me to put in the effort to create CBBM. One is that I had moved out of Cameroon. For 20 years, I have worked on protecting great apes, and making sure that they survive. And here I was walking different species, different landscape, and I felt that I am a failure. If the chimps could speak, they would probably say, or could speak human language, they would probably say I'm a failure. And that was driving me in one way. That guilt was strong. The second thing was that I had been working here in Nunavut for so many years. And one of the projects that our board does is a community-based monitoring network, which is a program that allows us to work with harvesters in the communities to document their knowledge of wildlife, which is basically where they're going every day as they go out on the land, what they're seeing, what species they encounter, and what they are taking from the land, what they're harvesting from the land. And through that, we have built a huge database of information about the distribution, abundance, and use of wildlife within the territory that I think helps with the quest to use Indigenous knowledge in wildlife and co-management. We can talk about Indigenous knowledge and co-management for days, but the thing is, most often it is just conversations. It is those conversations are passionate, but at the end, we always still struggle on how we should use Indigenous knowledge in making decisions that support management of wildlife. Many attempts have been made in the past to say, let's integrate Indigenous knowledge into Western scientific knowledge. what that usually just means is, you can argue, is a euphemism for let's assimilate. And if you know around the world the history of assimilating people, it is like take them in and clean them of what they are so that they can become who we are. It is getting rid of their own culture or their own systems and just making sure that they become part of this system. But that is not actually the way that it should be. That the way that it should be is that it has to be the other way of seeing things that could be so different that it is not integratable. You cannot, how do you integrate two assumptions that are fundamentally different? How do you integrate two cosmologies, two worldviews that don't use the same metric, that do not see time the same, that do not, necessarily see changes the same? There are a lot of discussions now about uh, resilience and adaptations to climate change and all of those discussions. And the same questions are coming up. What is resilience? Who is defining resilience? Do we have to ask questions differently? How will Indigenous people have approached this? What knowledge do Indigenous people bring on the table? Back to the program that we're running at the NWMB, I find that it brings perspective. It brings those arguments, it gives those argument weight when Indigenous people are now showing you, no, this is where we go. This place is important to us because this is where we go. This is what we see, and this is what we are taking from the land. And it brings some parity because, knowledge these days, whether we like it or not, you have to show the data, you have to display it on a map. And when you tell the story will drive people will be passionate, people will even cry. But when the bureaucrats go down to making decisions, they're looking at paper. They're not putting the story down to be auto-replay the story, to use that as one of the data points that they use. They're looking at paper. And if you can have Indigenous people tell their own story in a way that uses modern technology of just recording things on their own phone, it could help. So after participating in this program in Canada for 5 years, I thought, even though the system in sub-Saharan Africa or in the Congo Basin is not set up the same, and this program would not necessarily be as successful down there as they are here, because the system here is at least set up to recognize Indigenous English, at least set up to fully recognize Indigenous people. But this could be a starting point if we come up with projects that start empowering Indigenous people who live within the Congo basins, who have now been forcefully removed from the forest and settled along logging concessions to give way to protected areas and logging concessions, and who face high levels of racism and marginalization. The story, you can keep going. But if you start empowering them to start collecting their data in a very small way, just having, when they go to the forest, they record where they go, what areas are important for their spiritual practices, for their cultural practices, for their subsistence, and what animals they're seeing and what animals they are harvesting. You will start to build their stories in a way that they will not be ignored, in a way that consultation will then be required, and that consultation may be meaningful. So based on this, I haven't gone through this system and thinking that this is something that could really help. I decided that why not just create an organization that share this kinds of view and can start. It will be an uphill battle, but start to implement some of these ideas in the Congo Basin. So it is that. It's the guilt for having left great apes and to die. And the new knowledge that I've gotten in North America about actual co-management and participatory wildlife monitoring that said, those two things, when they came together, made me to create an organization.
In this part of Dennis's talk, we now transition a little bit because he's now in the Canadian Arctic, which is quite a lot different than Cameroon, obviously. And he's with the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board as their director of wildlife. And I was trying to imagine what it would be like in his shoes to have made that career change and to now be up north, and what it's like managing a team of biologists, because they do have a great team there. And I personally don't know all of his colleagues, but I was imagining how there may be a lot of different perspectives amongst a team of biologists, and certainly they wouldn't have all had his background. So I was kind of wondering if they all had the same appreciation for social sciences and traditional knowledge that he did. So I think you'll enjoy his reflections on this part of his career.
That's a tough question. Yes, that is a tough question. Here's what I think is the fundamental thing that I've learned, and I'm sure my colleagues have learned that too. We all come to the North, those who do not come from the North, we all come to the North with a lot of assumptions. And unfortunately, some of those assumptions, or most of them, are not positive ones. And that is the same when you go to a new culture that you don't understand. You start assigning stereotypes into all kinds of things because they're different. But what I have learned, or what I've come to realize, and I think my colleagues have, is that the more you stay in the North, the more you realize how little. It's like every day, every passing day helps you realize the level of how deep your ignorance is. And this is something very profound. Every day I see something that no, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. For even have taught it that other way. And the way how we would deal with it. We all come from a science background. I may be more experienced in different worldviews, but that doesn't mean that I was trained in the Western science. It's of no fault of our own to carry all of these preconceptions. We were for how long? Since we're in grade 6, you just start hammering this into your head until you get out of university. Is the same thing. And it becomes your own religion. That is how you know the world should work. So you come and it doesn't quite work like that. And then you struggle. And everybody struggles. Some people are humble enough to use their struggle as an opportunity to learn. Not everybody is like that. Some people come wearing the cap that I'm right. I was a smart student in school. I passed 8 grades for all my classes. I know this thing more than you. That's it. And when you come and you're willing to humble yourself, willing to learn, and willing to listen with their willingness to change, rather than just listen until you get the opportunity to speak, it helps. It helps with your assimilation. You kind of start getting to know things. And if you're willing to set aside your own viewpoint, at least for one day, and completely immerse yourself in the other person's viewpoint, I'm not sure you have a lot of conflict. And that doesn't only apply to the North, it applies for you to your relationship with your brother, your sister, your friend. If you just hold on to your own viewpoint and think that you're kind of God, you never make peace with anyone. You have to sometimes be willingness, even though it makes you very vulnerable, willingness to set aside, to say, yes, I think assume for 1 second I am an idiot. Completely believe that you are an idiot. And then you can then listen to what the other person is trying to communicate to you and find meaning in that. And that is also how you learn in a new culture. And I think I will say we here, I have the opportunity to work with people who are, first of all, very humble themselves. Like my boss is Inuit, and I just observe and learn from him. Sometimes when I get frustrated in the moment, but when I go home, I try to say, why do I think he was insisting that things be done? And I see if there is, I still have to come and have that discussion with him, or if I now understand him to the extent that I'm going to buy in. And allowing, when people come in new to the job, allowing them time to feel it for themselves, and also expecting them to fall several times before they finally start walking, kind of helps. Because yes, when you leave school, everybody is, whether is undergraduate or master's, a PhD, you often think that you have conquered the world and now you have to go tell the world what they have to do. And then most people come here right after school and then you're injected in a new system. You don't know what to say, you don't know how to, things are not worded in the same way. I'll tell you a story of my first interaction. I came into the board. We have a workshop. I think it was a strategic plan workshop. And so they create a committee, right? In the committee. So yeah, a group. They split us into different groups and we're doing different activities. And the facilitator said 15 minutes. So okay, I'm the one leading this group and had I think 3 Inuit elders in that group and another person was not Inuit, and they were talking and we were all talking. I was writing down the notes. I was trying to coordinate. I'm sure I was talking too much. I always do. And then one of the elders was still talking, and I said it was time for us to break because rigorous 15 minutes have to cut it off. So I cut him off, and it was not funny. And I learned that day 7 years ago. I did that because it was not funny. You don't cut an elder off. When others talk, let him talk. You sit. You have whatever is in you that's telling you that, oh, we have to stop now. You have to put it on it and sit on it and wait and wait. And then only when the right opportunity comes that you ask the question, have you finished? Can we move on to another thing? So little things like that, when you get them, and if you're humble enough to realize, oh my God, what did I do? That it is not cool. You can cut your colleague off in a conference. You're facilitating a conference. Say thank you very much. You can interview on CNN. Somebody's in the middle of a statement. You say that's all the time. We have to cut to commercials. Yeah, doesn't work up here that the same way. Your time thing doesn't mean the same. Then I kind of remember comparing that to living in a gulag, where I first came to the northern and living in a gulag. And during the summer months when it's daylight, 24 on 24 forever, for months, time didn't mean anything. So I was out on the line with a friend and I asked, what time is it? And then he said, why does it matter? What does it matter what time is it? Like, there's no difference. You don't need to carry a watch around here. When you're tired, you go home. When you want to sleep, you sleep. It's not going to get dark anyway. It's going to be the same thing. And time, from that perspective, and you see people who've lived all their life on the land and live under that, time really doesn't have the same meaning. And therefore, this thing that we say time, and it guides us every now and then. We carry watches, we carry phones, we carry computers, we look at the time on all these 3 devices all the time, and we run here, we run there. It may not be the same for everyone. And then you extend that to the time that the species is going to be present, or the species is going to decline, or the species is going to do this, and all of these time frames we put on when should we put a restriction, 2 years or 3 years, and all of that is all about time. It may not carry the same meaning. And are you making those adjustments? Are you making those adjustments to accommodate for that? Until you do, you will not. You still not listening. And that's it's just those little pointers. And I think all of us, I'm lucky to have a team that really is doing well. All of us, we are adapting. Nobody comes here, with all of it. You have to learn. You have to humble yourself and allow yourself to fail. Just and when you do that, you learn. That's all.
So you can see that Denis does approach his work with a lot of humility and um, has been learning like all of us when we go to a new area. And I could tell that that experience with the elder has really stuck with him, and I'm sure that he has adjusted ever since. And one of the things that I had mentioned is that Denis does think very deeply about traditional knowledge and co-management. And in my conversations with him, he often refers to this idea of suspending our disbelief and what may it take for someone to trust Indigenous knowledge and just accept that it works and it's okay to run with it at times. And in this part of Denis's talk, he'll share what he means by that.
And I think if I also remember it correctly, it is because I have, trust me, in order to do my work, I have read a lot of books about poor management. What really does it mean? And if you ever go to read the land claims and all the rules and responsibilities of all the different patterns in this puzzle that they put together and call it poor management, they don't give you, they're not prescriptions. They give you generalities of what you shall or shall not do. And they're not prescriptions how to do it. And I asked someone who's had more experience than me in commercial, I said, why do you think that is? He said, that was so that you figure it out together. We cannot just prescribe for you. Yeah, okay, if you're sick, you take Tylenol. All right, it's finished. There's nothing figuring out. We come into a room to discuss how somebody's going to take Tylenol. Better not come. It's clear. And they say, you see, maybe everybody's going to come together and try to find out what you're sick of and how we should help, or how they can help and how we get back. And they just lose their responsibilities open to interpretation. What does co-management actually means? How adaptive should we be? What is the meaning of consultation? You have to consult, okay? How much consultation is adequate? How meaningful should it be? What we hear all of these things about participation, for free and informed consent, which are all these things that make co-management work. But a bigger one is allowing Indigenous people's evidence to thrive, allowing Indigenous people's knowledge to be able to stand alone, to be reliable when you make decisions, that you can justify your decisions on Indigenous knowledge. That's the hard one. How do you then? Because knowledge is like it's like a religion. It's a belief system. It's what you believe, the way you think that the world works. If your belief is so different from mine in terms of how progress are going to change with climate change, how can I even rely on your what you're telling me to make a decision? To do that, sometimes you have to suspend your own belief in order to see the other person, to truly see the other person, and trust that if this is what the person is sharing, is what has worked, is what has been passed down from generation, that this is how you deal with this. trust that it will be okay, even when based on your own knowledge and your own way of thinking, your own way of making assumptions and making inferences, you do not trust. You do not. It is the Jesus thing. You don't have to have lived in Jerusalem to trust that Jesus. If you're a Christian, to trust, to go to church, you just have to trust and obey. It says, the scripture says. So when you suspend your belief, it's like walking, being comfortable. You're a piloting this plane, being comfortable to wake up and let an indigenous person sit on that seat and trust that you will still arrive at your destination. That is it. You completely suspended that whole thing that is making you to never give it to him. You suspend it and you trust that in an adaptive co-management system, if anything goes wrong, we talk about it, right? That it is okay if from time to time you wake up and give the chair to the other person. Not just sit there and say, okay, tell me your own ideas so I can add to my own. No, maybe you just suspend your whole belief, suspend it for a while. Let him trust. If you need to cover your eyes while you trust, do it. And see. So it is that level. That is where I think people always go until they do not go. They end before they can actually truly trust in a way that you can suspend your own belief and let that person's belief ride the rest of the trip. And in a co-management system, again, where decisions are made, they are implemented, you see what is happening, and then new decisions are made, there is really space for that to happen. If species now become managed by indigenous people according to their own system of management, you give it a try for 4 years, it doesn't work, everybody will know that it doesn't work. If the species is plummeting, there will be urgent action that will be able to be put in place. So I think that is what I mean by suspending a belief. It's more about trust.
I really appreciated that part of Dennis's reflections and advice about co-management, and couldn't agree with him more. I wish there were more situations where we could just trust local people and indigenous decisions, and accept that they are monitoring and can be trusted to implement some really thoughtful and useful actions in more cases than not when things are done from afar. So I really appreciated Dennis articulating all of that as well. As we moved forward in the conversation, I then asked Dennis about the diversity of topics that he works on in his role as director of wildlife, and the variety of species that they study, whether it's bowhead whales, narwhals, beluga, migratory birds, polar bears, caribou, muskox, and so on, and was really curious about how he adapts to that kind of environment and what he thought of it.
Great question. Jimmy, I think it's both. It creates challenges, of course, but I think overall, above all, it makes the job interesting because the different angles of passionate arguments, inspired by the different biologists of the species, and what is happening to them will never be the same. Like there's other species around here, and it makes the job interesting. Number one. Number two, it allows for us to compare things. Well, let's bring the model for narwhal into just recently. I was having a conversation about somebody about the credit system in Nunavut, where when you have a spore base, if you're allowed to harvest 10, if a community is allowed to harvest 10 polar bears every year from a certain subpopulation, and every year they harvest just 6, they can keep that 4 in the bank. It is a problem now because that bank just keep growing until the next time a decision is made to change the total allowable harvest, which is the amount that can be harvested. And now, if somebody wants to take all of those birds that are in the bank and kill them in 1 year, there'll be so many poor bears that are going to be killed. So it's creating a lot of perceptions, but also a lot of conservation challenges. And then I was talking to somebody, and we were talking about Nawa. We had a system for Nawa carryover. That is a little bit different. You only carry over for 1 or 2 years, and we say, let's look at Nawa and see what lessons we can learn from Nawa that we can apply in polar bears moving forward. So, cross species, bringing ideas from here. The next thing is that it brings the diversity. This diversity of species brings diversity of viewpoints, a diversity of experts, and diversity of elders that you get to talk with. You learn from a polar bear expert, but one day you start talking to a Nawa expert, and oh my God, this is a whole different angle. And then he sees the world a little bit differently because he sees it from hunting animals, not the way Nawa behave. He brings you that little bit of knowledge about Nawa, sees about Nawa, what his observations of Nawa are, and then you say, oh my God, this I have learned. So yes, it brings challenges in terms of, oh my God, meeting in the afternoon is about polar bears. The next meeting, 5 minutes after, you have to excuse yourself and you're talking beluga, and then at 3 o'clock you are bullhead whale. Switching your brain from polar bear, everything you need to know, to Nawa, to within the same days. So the same day can be very challenging, but I say it's fun.
So it was clear that Denis, like many people in this field, do thrive on the diversity of topics that you get to study and be engaged in. And as we were winding down this talk, I was curious to see if there was anything on the horizon that Denis was really excited about or to get the results of. And turns out that there were some judicial reviews that they've been following quite closely, and I'll let him explain how some of these outcomes could be helpful for his work.
There will always be projects and decisions that are happening, quite a few that are interesting. But I think I'm excited about something that is quite frustrating. Let me explain. So, this year and beginning last year, there have been a lot of legal challenges to the work of the NWMB and the government, particularly from one of the Inuit organizations that is a co-management partner, speaking about co-management. So when our board make decisions, the decisions are sent to the minister, and the minister, if it is a decision of marine animal that lives in the water, it is to marine freshwater. It is to the federal minister in Ottawa. If it is a decision about the animal that's on land, like walrus or polar bears, polar bears or whatever, something, is sent to the government minister. The minister has to accept that decision for it to become law. The minister may reject the decision, then the board has to make a new decision and all of that. But within all of that, there is a space for judicial review. If anybody is not happy with the decision of the NWMB or the minister, mostly the decision of the minister, that person can actually judge to look into. And in Nunavut now, we currently have quite a few, I think 2 or 3 judicial reviews that are ongoing. 1 or 2 on polar bears, 1 on Nawa. And there's a very, it beats the intent. The intent was for people to work together. But sometimes we have been arguing about a particular thing for so long, they just don't want a judge to say something. But when a judge says he was wrong, then that becomes, the way to go. And then we don't have to continue to beat ourselves for another 5 months. We can just then follow the directions from a judge. So it's a negative thing because I think this judicial review should not be happening. There should be last resort. That co-management should actually work because co-management, when the judicial review mean co-management is not working, or that co-management is struggling. But sometimes I look forward, I want to hear what the judge will say, particularly about this probate credits I just spoke to you about. The decision is going to come this year. I'm excited to know what it is and what that means, so that we can then move ahead and do the work that we have been hired to do, all of us. So I would say that's exciting. It's not really an exciting thing. It's a negative thing, but I'm more anxious to know what the judges say. So that excites me.
At this stage of Dennis's talk, there was a really good question from one of the students in the class. Her name was Laura, and she obviously enjoyed the level of open mindedness that Dennis has, and the way he talked about suspending his own beliefs. And she asked him a very interesting question and was wondering if there was a particular story or moment in his life that he could point to that suddenly made him able to suspend his own beliefs and be more open minded. And I think you'll really enjoy this fascinating story that he was able to share as a result of this question. And I really hope you enjoy this part.
Thank you, Laura. That's a brilliant question. I'll tell you the story. So when I was interviewing people to know traditional knowledge and can contribute to conservation of conservative lives, I talked to this guy who told me a story. And that guy, I will never forget his face. That was 2009, no, 2009, 2007. We are 2027, make it almost 20 years. But he told me about a story. He said he was a hunter, and hunting is how he earned his living. That's how he feeds his family and stuff in the rainforest. And there was this day he went out to hunt, and he had traveled. So normally hunters go out in the night. They have lights and they kind of see the animal's eyes and they shoot them, whatever. So the whole day he roamed the forest and there was nothing, man. This forest has completely been empty. And his wife had just given birth. And like in Africa, when your wife gives birth in Africa, it's so in Cameroon, when somebody gives birth, the whole community kind of prepare meals and eat from that household for about 2 weeks before the ladies will go back to their own kitchens. And the husband will have to provide some protein from the market or from the forest somehow to feed all of these people coming together to commune with a new baby. So that was happening at home. And that was the reason he went hunting that night. But he was not lucky. Now, instead of coming back at 6 a.m. With disappointment, he decided to just stay on and then during the day check out some monkeys or whatever he can shoot. He needed it desperately. So around 3 o'clock, he heard a group of chimpanzees. Chimpanzees will make all kinds of noise. All those kinds of noises you hear in a group, and they're hitting trunks of trees, they are biting each other, whatever they're doing. They're always very noisy. And he'd never hunted chimpanzees before. He hunted some Duna monkeys, but not chimpanzee. But today, he knew that people eat chimpanzee. He was going to eat chimpanzee because, you know what? He cannot go home a failure to his wife. That he was not willing to accept. So when the chimpanzees will stop, he will stop. When they're making enough noise, he will go close to them. And then, behold, he was afraid. Chimpanzees are the widest of wild animals. And they're smarter. They're 99% human. So you should know that they have techniques to spot you and deal with you before you deal with them. So he was afraid as well. But the opportunity presented itself. And he was under the tree, and the chimpanzees were up feeding. And they didn't realize until one of them saw him. and then they all disappeared, as they would do. Before you know it, they will all have disappeared. But there was this other chimpanzee that did not disappear as fast. And he said, "Oh God, that is my dinner for tonight." So when he moved closer to go closer and closer and closer to the chimpanzee, he realized that number one, the chimpanzee was carrying something on her back. It was a baby. So as he went close, and the chimpanzee realized that, okay, my fate depends on what I'm going to do next. The chimpanzee sent a hand behind his back, brought the baby, placed the baby here, and then used this hand and this one to beg him not to kill her. And he said, he told me this personally, his life flashed in front of him. The baby was as new as newborn. And his wife also had a baby at home. In that moment, he saw his wife and his baby begging for their lives. And by the time he was out of that episode, whatever it was, finished, his gun was on the ground and the chimpanzee had left. And at that point, he was happy to go home to his wife with nothing. And the story is that he had saved the chimpanzee with a baby who begged him like a human would have. And it is difficult to listen to that guy and not shed a tear. It's difficult to listen to that guy and not be transformed, even when you do not understand. You have to. And in telling the stories, he believed that chimpanzees were humans. Of course, chimpanzees are humans. What does 0.1% of the DNA means? But in his perspective, he was saying that it's actually humans that have transformed into chimpanzees. That is his belief system. Who cares? Who cares if I don't share his belief system? The story, I'm sure everybody he tells to, and everybody who then tells and everybody who tells to, get changed by it. And I'm sure that one I remember vividly. The stories like that must have changed me along the way somewhere. I think the dilemma is that the non-Inuit people have not taught themselves enough to listen, and to listen enough with a willingness to change, and the willingness to suspend their unbelief, the willingness to completely trust the way you trust that Jesus is looking at your house when you were sleeping, when you do not. I think that is the thing. Again, comparing places, Canada is enshrined, the Nunavut Agreement is enshrined in the Constitution, right? It is who we are, is that we must do these things. We must be honorable, right? The duty to consult is a solemn declaration that is enshrined in the Canadian Constitution, that when you engage Indigenous people, you have the Crown has a duty to consult. There's no such thing in Africa or in sub-Saharan part of Africa where I come from. And that is a big thing, that the system is already here. What is missing is a reluctantness, being reluctant to set aside, being reluctant to say yes. People say yes when it matters, but are they really saying yes when it comes to actually implementing the things that will have? Are they actually listening? You can hold a hearing and listen to Indigenous people every day, and then you go away and rely on the science paper to make your decision. Is this window dressing? Which, if we just do less of window dressing, actively finding the ways to be a slave to to Indigenous knowledge the way we are a slave to science, and trusting that it will be okay, or leaving the chair and allowing those spaces for Indigenous people and their knowledge and their practices and their belief system to thrive. Just leave the space. Don't stand around and try to, with the other hand, try to compare. Sometimes just leave the space. If we do that, we already have the system that So we already have co-management boards designed with the intent to do all of these great things. And no, we don't need people to know more. Just need people to listen more. That's all it is. We listen with the ability to actually change, actually accept what you're hearing. Yeah, I think that's what we mean.
So that final story concluded our time with Denis that evening, and I really hope that you enjoyed listening to his perspectives, his positionality, the different things he's been able to compare and contrast, the diversity of things he's experienced, and his use of storytelling to make his points is very instructive as well, I feel, and really enjoyable. I could listen to many more stories that he has, I am sure. And as you follow along in the Co-Management Commons podcast, I hope you've been able to appreciate that there has been a lot of different guests from a lot of different sectors that impact co-management, whether that's people in government or practitioners like Denis, or researchers, elders, Indigenous knowledge holders. There's so many people that are involved in co-management at different levels and from different disciplines that I'm really hoping that the diversity and interdisciplinary nature of co-management can come through as you enjoy this podcast. So thank you for listening again, and we'll have another one for you really soon. Take care. Hi, I'm Dr. Jamie Snook, and thank you for listening to another episode of the Co-Management Commons Show. Honoring the spirit and intent of agreements with Indigenous peoples is an important form of reconciliation and social justice, and educating ourselves about opportunities with co-management is time well spent. This conversation continues, so please like, share, subscribe, and visit www.comanagement.ca. Join me again next time for another interesting discussion about the co-management of fish and wildlife in Canada and around the world.